당신들 말이야. 지금 기차 안에서 무슨 일이 벌어지고 있는지 몰라?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kulturecast. I am your host, Chris Stachiw, and I am joined by one good friend and, another who is an aficionado, as they self-label. Dr. Perlmutter, all the way from Texas Tech, joining me once again.
Hello, Chris.
She is a K-drama anthropologist, which I think is a very good way of putting it, especially if you don't grow up in Korea and it's not a form of media that you're watching all the time. Miranda is here to join us to talk about Train to Busan.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I don't watch a lot of K-drama. So before we talk about Train to Busan, which is a K-action horror film that seemingly made it quite across to the United States in a rather big way. We talk about it, but tell me a little bit about why K-drama, because that's very specific, obviously. It's a very specific thing, especially for Western audiences to be kind of getting in.
Yeah, that's a great question. K-dramas have a really specific aesthetic. They started way back as miniseries and sort of soaps, just like we had here, just like our grandmothers would watch these serial dramas that were really intense and had a lot of like interpersonal relationships. And they grew into this industry that has spanned worldwide. Even if you are not interested in K-dramas or Korean culture, you know who BTS is, and you have probably heard of at least one Korean drama that's been popular, at least here with Western audiences. For such a small country, it's really remarkable that they have such a booming entertainment industry, specifically for media, for movies and TV shows. So, speaking as someone who's seen a lot of romance-specific genre K-dramas, because that's mostly what they're centered around, I can definitely say that there's tropes and things that often show up that a very specific audience enjoys and can appreciate, even if you see it over and over again. It's something that you always can enjoy. Even if you're seeing the same kinds of characters and the same kind of love story, there are just probably, like, at this point, hundreds of thousands of Korean dramas where you can sort of watch the same love story unfold over and over again. That's really appealing to people who watch it for just pure enjoyment. But then there's also
some that is the closest analog. I mean, I know you said soap operas in American culture, but I mean, what would be something more contemporary? Would it be, I mean, it sounds somewhat, and this is not to be dismissive at all, because this is a massive industry. It sounds in a way like Hallmark. It's kind of in terms of like trope expectations and the way they're received by the audience. There are people that outside to it look at it and go, well, that's quaint and kind of kitschy and saccharine, but the people that watch it don't care. And I mean, is it somewhat in that same vein?
I would say there are definitely K-dramas that are created for that particular audience, but it has changed in the same way that like our early 2000s shows feature a lot of things that we would now consider inappropriate, a lot of kinds of relationships and a lot of phobias that now Netflix or any other streaming service would absolutely not approve of having on their family-friendly show.
Right.
And again, it's just like shows here where there's many different genres and approaches that they take to these stories. So I would say, yeah, some of it is kitschy and some of it is Hallmarky, but some of it can be just as violent as Western. You know, Train to Busan is an excellent example.
Right.
As Western media, because it's a really fast evolving industry that's changing as the country is changing.
So, as you mentioned, we are going to be talking about Train to Busan, which if you've listened to episodes of my show that feature Dr. Perlmutter, you'll know that he's not necessarily a fan of horror movies, at least, well, not The Witch anyways, from the sound of it. So, I'm actually glad that you're on this episode, Dr. Perlmutter, because I think that this movie is a great kind of bridging of the gap between horror, action, and Miranda, to your point, drama, like a lot of it, like to the point of, I mean, again, I wouldn't say maudlin or saccharine, but it's definitely of a tone and type that is very specific and aimed in a very specific direction and very successful for what it's doing. But on this episode of the Kulturecast, we're going to be talking about 2016's Train to Busan. So the film is directed by Yeon Sang-ho. It stars Gong Yoo, Jung Yoo Mi, and Ma Dong-seok. And the film is about a father and daughter on a train together going to Busan, and then the zombie, I wouldn't say apocalypse happens, but a zombie infection begins in the country of South Korea. And the worst and best of humanity happens all at the same time. It's a lot. It's a fun movie, maybe. I don't know how. I don't know if it's fun. I think it's a movie. And I think it's a movie that is. Well, we'll talk about it. But Miranda, I'm going to kick it to you first, and then Dr. Perlmutter. Why Train to Busan? You kind of already alluded to it, but why specifically?
This movie was extremely popular both here and in Korea, and it's easy to see why because it's very exciting. They do a great job of keeping the tension up the whole time. It's unique because it's on a train, so not only are they keeping a fast pace, like within the narrative, but they're literally keeping a fast pace because they're on a speeding vehicle. And it also has a really star-studded cast. So Gong Yoo is a very famous actor. He was in Squid Games. He was in Guardian, the Great and Lonely God, which are two extremely famous Korean pieces of media that have come out within the last 10 years. And Ma Dong-seok, who is another extremely popular actor who's usually in action films, just because of his physique. And he's sort of like The Rock. He plays the same guy every time.
Right.
But he's an incredible actor. He's really funny. Most of the jokes in the film, you were talking about how the jokes are kind of few and far between. It's mostly tense drama, but most of the jokes were, from him.
Right.
And that's a character that he plays in almost every single piece of media that he's in. So it was really set up for success. And then this director also, I think, utilized a lot of things that are difficult to employ in a Western movie. For one, there's no guns. Nobody ever fires a gun. The military have guns, but none of our characters do. There's not a single civilian that has an automatic weapon. And I think that makes it much more exciting. They mostly use baseball bats or their fists. And I think it's much more exciting to watch somebody hit a zombie in the face with a bat than it is to just watch them shoot them from farther away.
It's a level of stakes you can't get with guns. Yeah. No, and no, it's I hadn't thought about that, but it is okay. Yeah.
I think it makes a big difference to the kind of weapons that you're using. And also there's a heart to the story. There's, very, very tender scenes between many of the characters, not just the father and daughter. It establishes really realistic and frankly, super moving to the point of tears by the end of the movie when we've spoiler, we've lost some people along the way. Every element of it is really well balanced. There's just enough action and there's just enough heartfelt scenes that the whole movie is entertaining all the way through because it never lets up. There's always something going on, whether that be the characters talking to each other or fighting off zombies or whatever. But I think ultimately it's really entertaining because the director understands how human relationships work and he understands how to connect his characters to the audience so we actually care if they live or die, which is one of the most important things when you have a film like this.
And it's rare in horror, period, regardless of who's making them, be it a Korean director or an American director, to get your audience to resonate with the people in the movie is not, it's not something a lot of horror directors care about because they look at it from the other direction. The killer or the kills are more important, not the people being killed. And that's why so many horror movies have no lasting power at all, is because there's nothing for the audience to really connect with other than cool effects, which is fine, but those are not as few and far between as they used to be. Dr. Perlmutter, I'm very curious. What did you think of Train to Busan?
Well, it surprised me because I loved it. I had watched zombie movies in the past or Walking Dead type television shows. Certainly, I'm old enough to have watched the original Night of the Living Dead, not in a theater, but maybe 10 years after it was made. And I think it was about season 7 of The Walking Dead that I said, okay, that's it. I'm done. I will never watch another zombie movie again. I was so mad at some of the decisions, including some of the characters they killed off, I think, honestly, purely for financial reasons in the TV show The Walking Dead, that I just said, I don't have to sit through this. Now, on the other hand, I have been writing probably my whole academic career about violence in media, and criminal violence, and I'm interested in that as a topic. So I'm always curious at how different cultures, different directors, different storytelling lenses approach seeing exponential violence, like people being killed, but in the worst possible way. So I think this film does violence in a really creative way. I mean, I'm not a lover of horror and violence, but like I sat through this every minute. I never checked my phone. I never thought there was a scene that could have been cut. Actually, that's the second point, is that it's such a taut film, as Miranda was saying, is that what would you cut out? I couldn't think of a scene that they could have dropped in this movie. Everything made sense in a sequence, and they kept coming up with sort of new ways for the zombies to be threatening. I mean, new positions for the protagonist to get themselves in trouble. And then going back to something you said about CGI, this is such a well-executed film. I think I looked it up, and I mean, the budget I have a note here what the budget was, and I guess this is in American dollars. $8.5 million. And I was thinking, World War Z. Remember, if anybody except me watched World War Z, there was a scene in Jerusalem where the zombies are climbing up a wall.
Right.
And it was so badly done. And this $250 million movie or whatever the heck it cost, the zombies all looked like blurry CGI. And then there's a miniature version of this where the zombies are trying to climb on a moving train, and every individual zombie looked actuated. I don't know to this day whether it was incredibly well-directed extras and stunt people or it was CGI. It just looked so good. There's a crowd scene where the soldiers who have been converted to zombieism fall through a glass door and run. And again, every single zombie, when you freeze frame, looks like it's an individual who's become a zombie. And then the zombies on the train, again, they're all individual. It's so well executed with a budget that must have been like a rounding error or the lunch budget of World War Z. And I just was so impressed by that. And then lastly, picking up on something Miranda said, I teach a global communication class. And I've been teaching a version of this class for 35 years, and maybe 35 years ago, I would have talked about American cultural dominance and hegemony. So that people in Tanzania and Ecuador and Korea would be watching American box office Jaws and Star Wars, but we wouldn't be watching too many of those. In fact, foreign films like Akira Kurosawa samurai movies or Ingmar Bergman, relationship movies were sort of a specialty thing. Only certain audiences watch them. So now we live in this multipolar cultural world. There's a Bollywood, but there's a Soullywood. I mean, the Korea, this, as Miranda said, this tiny country, tiny population, tiny geography, has this outsized cultural footprint where I'd say 100% of my Generation Z and now Generation Alpha and maybe some early millennial students are pretty well aware of what's going on in the world of anything. That's a remarkable phenomenon in itself, and this movie is just a perfect example of that.
When I was in college, so to date myself, when I was in college in the late 2000s, I couldn't remember anybody being into anything culturally Asian other than maybe anime, manga, something to that extent. And it's so, I think for someone who is a fan of Korean culture, I think just broadly, I think it's really refreshing to see, to your point, both of your points, that Korean culture is kind of not only being given its due, but also really being allowed to flourish in a way that doesn't feel forced. I mean, I remember when Psy was the first Korean artist most Americans had ever heard. That is so, I mean, he's a great artist. I mean, what's funny is his best music never made it to this side of the world. It pretty much stayed in Korea. But it's really funny that was kind of one of the early points of Korean culture that the world was exposed to. And then within a couple years, it was Snowpiercer and Train to Busan and BTS. And it's okay, now it's not just a blip on the radar. It's a full-fledged thing that is actually, Miranda, to your point, taken over to the point where it is popular everywhere. I personally think Korean culture, and I think both put it pretty aptly, Korean culture is rather popular, I think, globally, which is, again, to go back to what you've both already said, for a country that does have such a small footprint and has had so many issues in the past globally with possible, political issues and, socioeconomic issues due to the country north of South Korea. I don't know, I'm glad to see that Korea is making a reason for the world to be invested in it as a country. And media export is like, one of the easiest ways to do that, especially in the day and age of streaming where, pretty democratic to put things on the internet. Because if memory serves, the reason size video got so famous was YouTube, which is the ultimate democratic video platform as far as I'm concerned, for good and for bad. But Korean culture, I would say the last 10 years has been pretty big for the influx of Korean culture into American culture, Western culture, as it were.
That's definitely true. I think a part of that is how stylized it is. It's very specific. I mean, there's waves of different aesthetics in K-pop or the types of K-dramas that are being released, but they're all really curated. I think that's part of the appeal, is how professional everything is. Specifically,
very clean, right?
Yeah.
Clean. And as someone who's been to South Korea and Tokyo, Seoul was cleaner than Tokyo. Which as most people who go to Tokyo always comment, Tokyo is a very clean place. I can tell you Seoul, even cleaner. Like the Korean culture, I respect their cleanliness and attention
And
to
efficiency.
detail. Yeah, unlike anything else, like as close to the Japanese as any culture is.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, especially in movies like Train to Busan, what we were talking about before with the tightness of the narrative, how there's, like Dr. Perlmutter said, there's just nothing that you can cut. I think that's pretty prevalent throughout the entire K-drama industry. I think that they're very good about creating a narrative and sticking to it.
I have a question on that. You mentioned about the sort of aesthetic of everything clean, but also like everything in its proper place. Like the Korean movies I've seen, which are like K-comedy or K-drama, part of the plot is driven by the sort of prescribed relationships people have, maybe like elders and young people and people dating or something like that. And this is a movie, of course, about total mayhem and chaos. And so I thought maybe it even have more power to a Korean audience or to people who have watched a lot of Korean movies that this is so. I mean, in a typical K-drama or K-comedy, correct me, Miranda, or explain to me, there would be a little bit of chaos, like two young people meet and they go against the sort of prescribed rules, and there's a little bit of breaking of the rules. But in this film, like everything has gone wrong, like everything's filthy, everything's broken, everything's blowing up, everything is being rubble. I mean, you wouldn't see a lot of rubble in the street, By the way, just in historical context, we have to remember that this is a country which was completely destroyed in a war in the 1953, the Korean Civil War, the Korean War, just devastated in the same way that you'd see some towns in Japan and Europe during World War II, and subject, especially in South Korea and North Korea, were both incredibly poor countries. And so Korea's ascent to being this first world country where it's just assumed that their technology is always like 3 or 4 years ahead of ours. That's just a fascinating thing to see. But I'm sort of curious about this idea of disorder in this film, like breaking up what we usually expect from visually and behaviorally a Korean film.
I've only ever seen one other Korean horror. Well, I guess two. One of them is Gongjam Haunted Asylum, which doesn't really count. I mean, it counts, but it doesn't in terms of chaos, because where that movie ends up going, I think, is very different. The other film that I've seen is The Host, and that movie still has that very, not regimented, but very specific feel to it. It feels less chaotic than this movie. This movie has a feel to it that, like, I have not felt with Korean films before, maybe outside of The Chaser, which is one of the other Korean films I've seen. But that one, again, kind of leans more into horror and gore and serial killers. So it's kind of, that's a little bit more the point. But this movie is, to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, just Like it's chaos throughout. There's momentary lulls, but the momentary lulls, it doesn't, even in those times, they have to figure out a way to make those lulls feel like not a lull, especially, when you have a horde of zombies pressing up against a glass door in the back.
Yeah, I think there's a problem in action movies. And I do see it in this one where the characters are cleaner than they should be. Everybody's hair is still like poofed and curled, and you can tell people still have makeup on. And I understand you want your actors to still look attractive. They do a pretty good job of roughing up the characters in this movie, but I still think nobody has any cuts, nobody has any scars. It's a pretty big deal whenever, or at least from what I've seen in K-dramas, if a character ever gets cut on the face or anywhere else on their body.
They've got scars on like their hands, but like their faces are just like a little dab of blood, right?
They're pretty pristine still, because that's important to Koreans to have clean, often, lighter skin. So in K-dramas, you'll often see like if somebody gets a cut on their face, it's a really big deal, like more so than it would be in one of our shows. And I think this movie is still guilty of that. If everybody would be a little more tousled up, like the Suwon, she's the kid, so she escapes some of it. I still think she would be grimier than she is. And the pregnant woman, whose name I don't remember, her face is pretty clear, but I still think she would be a lot like sweatier and grosser than she's depicted.
Even the homeless guy's not that.
Yeah.
By Western homeless guy standards.
Yeah.
I actually attempt for Santa Monica, but that's about it.
Yeah, he could just walk into any coffee shop here, I feel like, and get away with it.
Yeah, he's not that grimy.
He was also a really interesting character. I like that he wasn't evil. I like that he also sacrificed himself in the end. He was this, you kind of really didn't know what his deal was. He was just tagging along. He wasn't connected to any of the other characters, but he got his moment. He got to be a great guy in the end.
And I like the bait and switch at the beginning of the movie as well, where you think it's going to be him that's the one who infects everyone. And then it turns out it's actually just this like young teenage girl instead, which I like. I was going to say, like, I really enjoyed the movie. I had never seen it before. I had heard about it, as I'm sure anyone who watches a fair amount of horror movies and is open to watching, non-Western films, because my favorite cinema my favorite cinema is probably Indian cinema still, because the people that watch those movies actually care about going to the movie theaters. That's still an experience that matters. And so the people that make the movies are still, I don't know, they feel invested for a different reason. And it's weird because the Korean films that I've seen, this one was not one that I searched out. And I think it's actually for a similar reason to Dr. Perlmutter, which is I'm kind of burned out by zombies. And it's not just the Walking Dead of it all. It's just kind of the all of it all. Like, I would say the most important zombie movie for me growing up was Shaun of the Dead. It hit me at the right time. It had the right notes. It was speaking to me as someone who is a lifelong film lover and sits and watches movies all the time. Like, it's made by someone who watches about zombies and horror and other things. And this movie felt the same way that Shaun of the Dead did. Like, it felt like a zombie movie, but ultimately, the zombies aren't the important part of this movie. The zombies are, this just happens to be a movie about zombies on a train, but it's really about a group of people trying to survive together on a train and a dad trying to make good with it, show that he actually cared. And that, to me, is very Shaun of the Dead. It's very like putting the people before the panic, putting the actual human emotions at the core of it, and letting the fact that these are real characters breathe, and then forcing them to have to deal with, in both of these films' cases, zombie. And this film hit me the same way Shaun of the Dead did, where it's like, okay, I feel like I've seen a zombie movie that, for the first time Shaun of the Dead came out in like 2004. So for the first time since something like Shaun of the Dead, I feel like I'm seeing a zombie movie that actually doesn't care that it's a zombie movie, and it actually like lives that all the way to the end of the movie, where we almost have a Night of the Living Dead-esque ending where I was like, man, they're just going to kill them. It's just going to happen. I'm 99% convinced that we're just going to have a Night of the Living Dead end. And if they had done that, I actually would have been like, okay, like it's completely earned that ending. It earns the happy ending, but it totally could have earned like a 100% downer of an ending, the way Night of the Living Dead does, because the themes of the movie are not about the zombies. They're about how terrible human beings are to one another. And it's just by the grace of human beings being decent to one another, winning out in the end, that the two surviving characters don't die. And again, that's just very Night of the Living Dead, Shaun of the Dead, movies that care about the characters, not the zombies. And George Romero got that, better than anybody in terms of putting the humans before the zombies. And I don't know, like, I think The Walking Dead was there at one point. I think it lost its way long ago, but it was there at one point. When it was at its best, that's what it was about. And to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, I won't hate watch it anymore, but I really don't even watch zombie movies anymore, because post Shaun of the Dead and its success and Walking Dead, there was just so much zombie stuff all the time that I stopped caring. And this unfortunately got lost in that shuffle. And it's unfortunate that it did, because this movie is really good. Like, obviously, I'm not saying any sort of like new thing. We're watching it and talking about it because it's of the quality of the filmmaking, but this it lives up to what
Well, yeah, I obviously agree with that, especially about having a heart to the story is the most important part of the story. I definitely agree with the themes about it's showing the worst of humanity and how willing we are to sacrifice each other, and the very best, and the nature of relationships where you're willing to lay down your life for somebody else, or in some cases, a complete stranger.
Yeah.
And it's the ultimate sacrifice that you can make, especially for somebody that you just met a couple hours ago. But also, even though the heart of the story being the relationships is what makes the movie great, as you said, I think the zombies are still equally important. Like the type of zombie and how they're characterized. These zombies are really interesting. They're really scary because they're fast zombies and they're not trundling along Walking Dead zombies. I don't know if there were ever fast zombies in The Walking Dead. I never watched the series, but they're like Zombieland zombies. I mean, they're fully capable of getting you.
Dawn of the Dead.
Yes, yeah. And they seem to be indestructible too. There's that scene where they fall off of a helicopter and land on concrete, presumably breaking every bone in their body, and then they just get up and run around. And they're also, I think it's interesting how they all have this specific character. It seems as if they were sort of trained. I think they did a really good job with these extras of having them move in a specific way, because they all seem to lead with their mouths. They're kind of Naruto running towards the main characters with their arms out behind them, and they're trying to get the mouths as close as possible to the main characters. I thought that was really interesting. I've watched this movie several times, and I only really noticed it on this last rewatch. How they all move the same way, teeth first, as if like whatever this virus is obviously making them do that specifically to spread.
Yeah, the choreography is astonishing to me. I mean, I obviously it's a professional movie, and you sort of expect the stunt people to do what they're told to do, but it was almost like I was watching like the ballet in New York, which I don't do. So I'm creating an analogy that I've never seen, but I would expect that if I went to a professional ballet and people were dancing, or going back to K-pop, you see a K-pop video where there's like 50 dancers and they're all in sync. In fact, Miranda, didn't this sort of remind some of the sequences, not in a funny way, not in a super silly way. Some of the sequences felt like the choreographer from a K-pop video came over and positively gave an advice on how do you get 50 people to be in sync, like this zombie, whatever it is, right? We're told by the way, we're told just enough and not too much to what's relevant to the plot. There's no,
thank God,
there's no cutaway to a bunch of scientists talking about, well, I think the virus or the leak came and it did this. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
And thankfully, get back to Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead, I think, put the nail in that coffin by having every possible scenario be present jokingly in the first 15 minutes of that movie, where it's animals, a meteorite, a satellite, and then, one other thing. And it's like, okay, it stopped mattering. Like, don't belabor the point. But then there's a prequel animated film that talks about it. So it's like, but, at the end of the day, cool. They got to make money somehow, and then they're going to make they already made a sequel to this movie, and then they're going to make a American reboot, which
I vote no.
Yeah, like just God, why? Like,
I actually watched. This is a good example of that, right? And maybe Miranda, you could talk to about this. Is why this movie was accessible. I don't see why an American audience couldn't have watched this movie and enjoyed it. I don't see why we have to have The Rock do this.
Right? The Rock and Kevin Hart in Train to New York. Like,
They could do it on the subway. I think that would make a kind of interesting movie. They would have to change some things. They would have to be, it can't just repeat the story. They would have to.
I mean, if nobody's seen Train to Busan, you can just repeat whatever you want. I mean, that's the sad thing is like, I'm such an advocate for watching international cinema that I'm not like, I'm waiting for the Train to Busan remake so people in America will have seen it. To your point, Dr. Perlmutter, it's like at this point, there's no reason to not just watch it. You can rent it for $4 on Prime Video. People are more apt to rent, I don't know, Mandalorian and Grogu probably than they would be to watch this movie. And it's like, okay, I get it. That's fair. But I don't know. I think, and I always kind of go back to this bemoanment of people being unwilling to read while they watch movies. But I also think, a movie that requires subtitles will always be something that loses a percentage of the population, which is unfair because that should not be a stumbling block in this day and age. It really shouldn't. I know why it's not, because you actually have to pay attention to the movie and you can't just do something else. It used to be people were too lazy, and now I just chalk it up to people don't actually want to look up at what they're doing. They want to look at something else. And okay, but then nothing you watch is going to be worth anything, which is why we live in a hellscape of a Netflix second screen experience where we got to remind the audience of Stranger Things what happened in the last 15 minutes by saying it every 5 minutes. Like, what? Okay. I don't need a remake of this movie because you could just watch this movie. Just like K-pop doesn't need to exist in America. K-pop just needs to exist as its own thing. And you just like, you don't have well, I guess you do have some K-pop artists coming over here and doing American music with American artists or like English language music, but I don't think it would be as popular. I just like, I inherently don't think it would be as popular. I just don't think it's like they don't ask Justin Bieber to go sing Baby in French. Like they know who the audience who's going to consume this primarily is. I think I'm glad this movie was successful outside of Korea because there are still not enough Korean movies that have been successful in the United States. I think horror is a very easy way to get people outside of the States interested because horror fans are always looking for the next best horror movie that nobody has heard of. And this one kind of falls right into that camp of a low budget Korean horror zombie film that is way better than 99% of the zombie movies that have come out in the last 20 years.
They definitely spent money where it mattered. Like we were talking about the choreography. They got some really, really stellar, very popular actors. They have these beautiful sets. Maybe it was cheaper to shoot on a train. I mean, they're in a train car for maybe like half of the film. And
it's more impressive because they're shooting on a train. All that choreography that y'all have talked about is 10 times more impressive because they're executing it in a smaller space. Like it's infinitely more impressive than, I mean, again, they can do things out in the open, but the fact that it looks so good and seamless and expertly crafted on a moving train, but again, just the ramifications of shooting in his face like that and it being so convincing and well done is like, that's even more impressive. I would say movies on trains, though, tend to all fall into the same camp for me, which is there are some good ones, there are some bad ones, and then there's some that are so good they can have the train stop and people get off of it and then they can get on another train. And this is one of those movies because that's kind of the problem with a movie where people are all on a moving vehicle is what happens when the vehicle stops is at the end of the movie or is at the end of the conflict. I mean, Dr. Perlmutter and I know one another because of the Steven Seagal films and the Steven Seagal podcast I used to do. And one of his more famous movies is Under Siege 2, which takes place on a train. And when that train stops, it's just like, wait a second, like, what are the stakes here? And I love that this movie, the stakes are the zombies are the stakes. It's like the moving train is part of the stakes, but because their zombies are the ever-present threat, it makes it feel so much more like a ever forward moving film. Like the momentum carries the film forward. And it's not just because of the train, it's also because of the zombie.
Also, the feeling of being trapped. They're in such close contact with the zombies the whole time. I mean, they're just on the other side of a door. So, and the door is, I can't tell if it's made of plastic or glass, because when it breaks, it's like a glass. It shatters like a glass, but when they're banging on it, it bends like plastic. So I can't tell what that material is made out of. But it's even more exciting because, they're hiding in a bathroom or on top of those ledges for your suitcases. And it's very frightening to have your main characters be right next to those creatures, just like an arm's length away. I thought that was very clever.
That was probably the scene that whoever is trying to remake the movie saw and was like, this is it. This is
Definitely.
This is the scene where they're crawling in the luggage rack, where it's like, this is the scene. This is the scene that people will remember. Because it's memorable in a way that things aren't.
Don't you think that when I saw that scene, let's tell people who haven't seen the movie, we're not really spoiling this movie, by the way. You're going to get the same experience if you haven't seen it after listening to this podcast. But there's a moment where there's about 17 moments where they have to get 10 feet. That's what's so exciting, right? Their objective is to get 10 feet in distance, but there happen to be some human-eating zombies in the way, right? And they never repeat themselves. They never come up with the same solution twice. It's so clever. And then this one time, they think, oh, we will crawl. Now think about this. How many times, and I go back to the original Alien and Aliens movie where the alien or aliens goes into ducts, and that's been repeated so many thousand times where humans are ready for the aliens in the regular space and they're coming out of the ducts or they're coming out of the air conditioning or something like that. Well, here the humans, to fool the monsters, are crawling along the luggage rack. And I haven't seen that before. I was really thinking all the zombie movies I've seen or all the action on a train movies. I remember spy movies on a train or thriller movies on a train. Nobody ever did that before. And I was whoever wrote this movie, the people who created this movie did something really beautiful and intelligent. Is they probably went on a train, right? And they stood there and they go okay, I have to get 10 feet past zombies. What are my choices? And they refuse to compromise and just have the same thing happen every time. So I just thought that was so clever.
And I love that there's a conceit as well that the zombies can't see in the dark. So they also have, there's, again, to go back to the idea of there's not a lot of mythology in where did the zombies come from or how long does the infection take or what happens or what is the, like you said, no cutaway to scientists. And I think the other thing that's very smart about the usage of the space and the zombies is this is not one of those you get bit and 5 hours later you become a zombie. This is you get bit and you become a zombie. If you're not a main character, seemingly instantaneously. If you're a main character, they give you another minute to kind of judge yourself or be judged by your mental headspace. I think for me, the constant changing of the way that they get around the zombies and the way that they use that space, it speaks to someone who, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, understands if you do the same thing over and over again, we're not really being entertaining. We're just kind of giving the audience the same thing and expecting them to do something different with it. And this movie, shockingly, doesn't retread any sort of trodden ground at all, which again, for a movie like this on a train, it's this is the first movie that's ever taken place on a train, and especially not the first action movie that's ever placed on it. And I would say this is more of yes, it is a zombie movie and there are horror elements, but I'm not sure that this is, it is a horror movie, but it's also an action movie. I wouldn't say this movie is overly gross. We don't have eyeballs popping out and heads being chopped off. We do see people getting eaten, but then to Miranda's point, they look pretty normal after they become zombies. Their eyes are white and their teeth are gnashing, but they don't look they're not gross looking. If this was an American film, they'd be, arms hanging off or jaw gone or heads split open. And this is just kind of look like people with whited out contacts and blood capsules in their mouths, which is fine. I think, again, it just goes to the point of it makes them scarier that they have this erratic behavior and this really specific choreography that makes them scarier than just, them being gory or, intentionally gross. Which, to go to the other Korean films that I've seen, The Chaser is a lot more graphic than this film. And The Host, I think The Host is about as graphic as this film is in terms of it's more of like a monster movie, not a zombie movie. But I was impressed by how much they kind of held back for it being a zombie movie with the gore. Like, really, it's not. I think Shaun of the Dead is kind of gorier in a lot of ways. Like, they show dismemberment in Shaun of the Dead more than they ever show dismemberment or anything like that in this movie.
I feel like the low-hanging fruit in zombie movies or any kind of like horror war movie where people are getting sliced up or shot at is showing somebody's intestines hanging out.
Right.
People, they love that for shock value. That's in so many of these movies, and they never do that. I think the worst thing we see is somebody with a blood-filled mouth, or one zombie has his arm broken and it's like way behind his head. It's never too egregious.
No.
That's something else I appreciate, because they don't really need that. They're scary enough as is. And I also really appreciated how then it wasn't bogged down by the characters grappling with the morality of killing them. Oh, they're still people, and, we have to preserve them if we can. Nobody ever seems to question that, which I applaud. I think if you have a long-running television series and you have a character who's like interested in that and who thinks that they can be saved, that can be kind of an interesting plot point. But I hate it when that's introduced in movies, in zombie movies, where I think it's just kind of boring. I think it slows down the plot to have people trying to question whether or not it's okay to kill the zombies. I think that they should just, barrel through them like they did and focus on keeping the people who are alive.
Well, to your point from before, do they actually kill any of the zombies? I'm not sure. Like, the zombies seem, in a very Return of the Living Dead way, like rather indestructible. To your point of them falling out of a helicopter and then just getting right up and just running around and running at the camera. So they seem of singular focus, which, again, is scary. In Return of the Living Dead, it's, brains. So we don't get that in this movie. They're not, I don't know, they don't seem to be eating people. They just seem to be biting people and turning them into zombies. I don't know. I personally, I know that there is a sequel and a prequel to this. I don't have any interest in watching either of them because I like that, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, there's enough without being too much, without over-explaining everything and force-feeding me what I should think. Like, we see the deer at the beginning of the movie, and that's enough. Like, that is more than enough for me to understand that there's been some sort of outbreak of something. I don't need to know what. And over-explaining, and to your point, Miranda, then having people like, oh, it's my mom. Like, at this point, even the characters in these narratives would have seen a zombie movie. They would know what zombies are. Like, that's the problem with creating fiction in this day and age, is if you set something in 2026, people have heard of zombies. Maybe the only people that haven't heard of what a zombie is are like the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Like, I don't know how you would make a zombie movie in 2026 and have the scene of like, well, we can still save them, when that scene is synonymous with zombie fiction of any kind. Like, if you know a zombie movie and it's a lazy zombie movie, that is going to be one of the tropes. It kind of always is. And this movie, when the characters get bitten, it's just very matter of fact. And because there's not a lot of time in between when they get bitten and when they turn, which again, I think is one of the smarter things the film does, we don't get that hemming and hawing. It's just cut out of the movie intentionally. You can't have a scene where someone says, we need to save them, when from bite to turning is like a minute. That's just not a possibility. And I think for someone to do that with the zombie narrative is really smart, because it robs it of a lot of the tropes that, in my opinion, and you might agree, Miranda, are very lazy. And I think the best kind of fiction that's worth sharing with other people or talking about at length is not lazy, because there's even things that are failures tend to not be lazy. They're just making choices that maybe don't resonate with people. But I've seen plenty of bad movies that make a lot of really interesting choices that aren't lazy choices. But I've seen plenty of okay movies that make a lot of really lazy choices. And I'm just, I'm not here for it anymore.
Randy, I had a question for you. When I first watched this, one of the things I was looking for was to talk about in class, talk with my students about this action, or maybe some discussion makes sense only in X cultural setting. Like sometimes somebody I know who's from another country say, I watched this American movie, or I'll see this on Reddit. I just watched this American movie and I didn't understand why this person did this. And it's something that's an American cultural trait or behavior. But this movie, it seemed to me like I understood what people were doing. I didn't need to have a Korean cultural translator next to me. Did you feel that way?
Absolutely. There was, I can kind of see why they wanted to make like an American remake of this, because it really is conducive to just taking this narrative and bringing in English actors. There's nothing really that the average Westerner or really anybody from any other country probably would be confused about. There are many archetypes, many, like a dad who's not paying attention to his daughter's life, and two high schoolers who are in love, that are just kind of universal in probably most media industries in most countries. They just have developed either through influence from other countries' industries, or just from the way humans are, just human nature, the way we interact with each other. I really don't think that there is any culture shock in the movie other than, again, like the cleanliness of the train station.
And the cleanliness of the homeless man, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Cleanliness in general.
I would ask you, Miranda, because as someone who watches a lot of K-dramas, for me, the thing that I've noticed with the Indian cinema that I've watched, where the cultural kind of misses come in, are comedies, because there is a lot of humor in cultural and social mores that are specific to, Indian culture, or like Dr. Perlmutter mentioned, American culture or Korean culture. That's why I honestly stay away from foreign language comedies, because those tend to be the hardest ones, not to understand, but to appreciate as a non-speaker of the language and not understanding the culture as much as just not having grown up in that culture and having been kind of raised in it in a way where it's kind of second nature. There are plenty of people that understand, there's, let's say, Mexican culture recently, Hispanic culture has become very, I think it's kind of made more forays into, American culture with, certain things becoming more popular or becoming more, I guess, well known, but that there's still a lot of like things even from those kind of cultures where it's just, there's a miss on what I know and what someone else knows. And it's just, I just wasn't raised around it, or I'm not aware of it. And I don't watch Indian comedies. I really don't watch a lot of foreign comedies, because a lot of the comedy is just lost on me as a Westerner, because it's just culturally and socially specific. And I don't know, I haven't watched a lot of Korean comedies, but I'm curious if it's the same way, if you notice that in the Korean dramas, or if they're kind of similar to this and that they kind of stay more in a for everyone who's watching it anywhere kind of thing.
That's an interesting question. Sometimes there's Korean proverbs, something from their history that they would reference. Like we would say, a bird in hand is worth two in a bush. And a Korean person would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. There's some stuff like that that's just, phrases that you grew up with, or depending on, where you grew up, where your district was, and what part of the country you grew up in. Again, I really don't think Train to Busan had any jokes that weren't accessible. Like there were some funny, cute moments, like the song that was playing on Ma Dong-seok's phone when they were distracting the zombies, and our main character called it cringy. That's just like a funny, cute moment. And there was this one small moment that I loved where he asks his analyst subordinate, Analyst Kim, when they're in the office at the beginning of the movie, if he's one of the lemmings. And I wondered if that was a reference, like a Korean phrase. I don't think it is. But later in the movie, if you pay attention, you notice he's calling this analyst, and he has a folder of contacts of assumably his subordinates, and the folder is titled Lemmings, which I thought was just such a cute moment. And again, I think transcends every culture of like, it's interesting that, both our countries have this idea of like lemmings being these stupid creatures, which originated in that Disney documentary, which was faked.
Where they totally weren't forced off that cliff intentionally.
Yeah. Careful. Disney's going to come for your podcast.
That's fine. You know what? I'll let them, because it's...
The truth is out there.
But the truth is the horrifying truth. It is weird that that's still a thing that's being used. 2016 is only 10 years ago. It doesn't feel that...
It's just so... It was just such a funny, cute little in joke, and we wouldn't have noticed it if there wouldn't have been a captioning for the screen for what was being said on the phone, because it was in Korean. So I think it's really important to have captioning for even written stuff, because that can be really important in foreign language films. But it was definitely really easily accessible. That's part of the reason why it was so popular in the United States, because it's if you're willing to read subtitles, or if you're willing to listen to dubbed audio, which I am not, it's a great film. Anybody can enjoy it. Anybody probably above 16, I would say.
I was going to say, like, is it, I assume that you watch K-dramas in the language and read the subtitles, because for me, as someone who watches a lot of foreign film, that is 100% a hill I'm willing to die on, and I do not care. I will not watch something that is dubbed. I refuse. I outright refuse, unless it's unless that's literally the only way it was made, which I don't know if that's ever been the case. I won't watch something that's dubbed. Is not going to be better than just hearing the original language with subtitles. Unless I literally have an unsubtitled version and can't get one, I've never watched a dubbed film that is better than the original with subtitles. And the ones that always stick out to me are those Studio Ghibli films where I'm just like, I think they make them worse, actually. And I was already not resonating with Howl's Moving Castle, but having to hear Christian Bale doing dubbed dialogue is not something that makes this movie any better. Let's put it that way. So I don't know, like, I haven't seen, the Korean films that I've seen have been all in Korean with subtitles. However, I was trying to watch this on Pluto TV, and this film is so popular that you can actually only watch this film for free on Pluto TV with Spanish subtitles, which I thought about it. I was like, I don't know how good my Spanish is. Probably not good enough to understand Korean translated into Spanish, which then I'm trying to parse back into my head. So I thought about it, but,
Miranda, you mentioned something else in the movie, and I've watched probably no more than maybe a couple of dozen Korean movies and maybe a couple of actual dramas. They never have an international cast. I've never seen a Westerner as a student in the high school or any. I mean, I know this is trained to Busan, which is a regional city, and it's not like a subway or a train in downtown Seoul. But why do you think it is that they never have just like a French couple who just happened to be on the train? Because Korea is a massive tourist destination. There are a lot of foreigners or people who live in Korea and teach English and work in Korea. Do you think that's a cultural choice they make when they make these, or am I just saw a very small sample?
I was pretty shocked the first time I saw a non-Korean person in a K-drama. I think the first time, I'm actually not positive because it's just so few and far between. It's definitely happening more. They're definitely introducing more people. I mean, there's more like people of color in K-pop music videos, and they're definitely diversifying their casts, nationally. I don't know if there's a K-drama yet that has a non-Korean as like a main character. But I believe the first time I saw a non-Korean person in a K-drama was in the drama based off of the webtoon True Beauty, which was released in 2020. And I'm pretty sure they had a white person in the background at some point. I'm pretty sure. So it's really, I think that's pretty novel. That was pretty novel for the time, like in 2020. It's really not unusual to have not just an entirely Korean cast, but an entirely Korean background actors and crew. And in the credits, I didn't see a single person who didn't have a Korean name. So yeah, it's definitely still very homogenous. I wouldn't say to its detriment. And I'm not really quite sure why that is, why they haven't really broached including more people. Yeah,
they just don't need to.
Part of it may be that they know people are coming again for this really specific aesthetic. Part of the aesthetic is Korean people. And yeah, it's not something, again, like, yeah, it's a country that doesn't have so many people who were born there, not just expatriates, but people who were born there who are not Korean. So they just don't necessarily feel like they need to include anybody of any different international and cultural setting.
I'm thinking of the flip side of that. I remember the original Godzilla that was shot completely in Japan, with an all Japanese cast, but when they exported it, they said, "Oh, okay, if we're going to show this in the United States, we have to have an American character."
Who better
So
than
they got
Perry
American-
Mason, right?
Yeah, Raymond Burr, right? Who
Ugh.
played Perry Mason, was most famous for that. And they shot these scenes, which they edited in, but he's totally extraneous.
You're
to
being
the
so
movie.
kind to they edited him in, Dr. Perlmutter. They forced him into a perfect film and they made it a lesser version of a.
Yeah, so I wondered, I'm glad we don't have those days anymore where they were going like, the Train to Busan. Yeah, we're going to get some TV actor. I'm trying to think of somebody today. We're going to get Chris Pratt, and we're going to edit him. At that time, he was, of course, a movie actor as well. But like, let's have him do reaction shots. Like he's at the train control. Hi, I'm an American train supervisor visiting here. What's going on? Just edited it.
I think
So,
I really hate that he
right?
probably just created a universe where Chris Pratt is going to be in the Train to Busan remake. I hate that because
Let's see whether there's any Korean people in the Chris Pratt
they're
Train to Lubbock.
train. It's a bunch of rednecks on a train together. I'd watch that movie.
You're going to edit that out, right?
No, just for you. I would say the thing that's interesting, and from someone who watches a lot of Indian cinema, Korean cinema also doesn't have the Indian cinema fallback, which is we were a country conquered by British people for a while. And so our villains tend to either be Pakistani or oftentimes English. And so you have a bunch of, we need white English actors who can do white English as in British actors who will come in and do a high British accent from the 1800s and be villains in Indian period pieces. And there's like a cottage industry of British actors who just go over to India and play British villains in Indian period pieces because British actors playing British villains is just, you got to have a white person to do it. Korean culture doesn't, I mean, Japan, I guess. And you could have a Korean actor playing a Japanese character, I guess. I'm not sure. There's none of that in this movie. I would assume if they need a Japanese actor for something, they will hire a Japanese actor for something. But of the Korean films that I've also watched, there have been no white actors. I've seen this, The Chaser, and then I've seen a film that is about as tonally different from all of these films, Mr. Go, which is about a giant gorilla that plays baseball. So, and it's it's like Air Bud, but with a giant Mighty Joe Young sized gorilla that plays baseball in Korea.
I am shocked that hasn't been made into an American movie. I'm shocked that we have not remade that.
Me too, but
and a little disappointed.
Less fun than it sounds because it's as serious as this movie is. It's like a shockingly serious movie about a girl and her CGI gorilla. And unlike yourself, I too am disappointed it was not remade because an American audience, I feel like, would have to have a fun gorilla playing baseball movie made for them, not a serious gorilla playing baseball movie. But yeah, Korean cinema is very interesting because it all feels of a piece, but their sensibilities when applied to a specific kind of genre are so unique and, again, specific that it yields very interesting results. And The Chaser is a very interesting example of a Korean serial killer drama. I mean, I Saw the Devil, very similarly, a very good Korean serial killer drama. Like their like serial killer films are very brutal and go further than most Western cinema does. And I think it's just the Korean filmmakers, they have a very specific and unique vision for things and they know how to execute it. And I would assume that extends to K-dramas as well.
Yeah, there's that aesthetic that we were talking about, that really specific Korean sort of filter that was probably more easily identifiable in the early 2000s. As I think I said, there's been some Westernization, and probably K-dramas now more resemble Western TV shows, or maybe Western TV shows more resemble kind of K-drama aesthetics.
It's
so
that back and forth trade, right?
Yeah, it's definitely mingling together. So it's sort of more difficult to tell and distinguish who's influencing who.
Yeah, Indian cinema without musical numbers was not a thing, but then the more popular Western cinema became in India, the less required Indian cinema felt to include musical numbers. And so now you have films that effectively feel like a Western film with a musical number at the end or one. The rest of it is just like, what if Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible had a 2-minute dance number? And that's what it feels like now, as opposed to 45 minutes of music intercut throughout the entire movie. It's kind of sad in a way to see them kind of hewing closer to Western sensibilities, because I'm not sure Western sensibilities are the right ones to be hewing close to in a lot of ways, especially given the things that are popular here. And I'm not sure I agree or want to watch the things that are popular here, just because a lot of it doesn't feel like it's doing much of anything interesting anymore. And that feels like kind of the point. So why would someone somewhere else want to do that to their things that they make is a little shocking to me. But I mean, I guess Western audiences know what they don't like probably more than what they do like. It's probably.
I really want to emphasize the $8.9 million budget. What they were able to do with such a tiny fraction of what a typical large, sloppy, poorly executed Hollywood movie today costs is really remarkable. And it followed all the rules of Western filmmaking, its creativity, just execution. If you went just down the checkbox of every single thing, when the credits roll, like the carpenter and the sound design and everything like that, everything was just so well done on this fractional budget. And I think anybody who has not watched a Korean movie, this doesn't have one thing. I remember there was a Korean K-drama that I was watching, which was going along fine in terms of like an actual drama. It was a historical drama set in the royal palaces when Korea was a monarchy. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they opened the door and there were these two 90-foot rabbits who were making lunch. It was a little bit Indian drama there where suddenly you're taken out of the universe and people are dancing and things like that. But this film, I guess, said no to magical realism. We're going to just make a straight, just super well done action movie. And anybody who has not seen Korean movies, maybe because I guess the subtitles are a block. You're going to have to put your phone down. Yeah, it's true. But wow, please
you have to watch movies
movie.
like people used to. Just, I don't know, if you're going to spend time watching a movie, at least look up every now and then, or actually look up the whole time. Look, I don't know. Is that too much to ask? There are things that I can put on in the background. There are plenty of things. I wouldn't put on a movie I'm actively trying to watch in the background for the first time, or especially one that has a foreign language throughout. So I think if you're looking for a Korean film to introduce to people, that's not going to feel too overwhelmingly like outside of the pocket of Western cinema, and people can be amenable to zombies as much as like they're monsters, but they're not like heads exploding and none of that. Like it's about as gory as an American action movie is. This is a pretty good choice. And I don't, as much as I appreciate that James Wan wants to remake this movie's perfectly fine. Actually, this movie is perfect in a lot of ways for what I think you would want from a film that's both international but feels very approachable for Western audiences, which is a gateway to showing them more kind of challenging foreign cinema. And to bring this full circle, Dr. Perlmutter, you mentioned it at the top, foreign cinema used to feel like something that only weirdos would talk about. Like, let's talk about Ingrid Bergman, The Seventh Seal, and it's like, I'm out of here. I don't care. It's like that used to be a very specific kind of person. And I think it's interesting to me that we're still fighting that in a way that somehow Indian or Korean or other cultures haven't been making action movies and comedies. Like, no, there's all this really fun pop culture content from these countries that is not heady and serious. Just like there's heady and serious English language films, there's heady and serious Korean, Indian, and everything else. Like, it doesn't have to be that. And I think we're just now, because of streaming, coming around to the idea that like we can appreciate just an Indian action film and that's it. Doesn't have to be some like gazing into the human existence in the void. Like, it just can be a fun movie. Train to Busan doesn't need to be anything more than a fun zombie. It pushes beyond that in a lot of ways. And I think it has a little bit more to say about the human condition than most zombie movies do. But, I think it's a really good off-ramp for people who are looking to start a journey down Korean cinema that doesn't feel overwhelming in what it's asking of the audience. So, but Miranda, since you picked this film, I will give you the last word on Train to Busan.
I think you really hit the nail on the head at the end there. This is a movie that you can just enjoy without analyzing. A lot of good action, really sympathetic characters. It's a lot of fun if you just, want something to entertain you without thinking a lot about it. Or you could dissect it for an hour like we did. There's a lot to talk about, but there's also a lot to just appreciate in a non-complicated way. And those are, as you said, the best kinds of movies to introduce people to something that they may not have considered before. I do agree. This is such a good movie that if I was trying to get a friend into Korean culture, if I didn't begin with BTS, I would start here. So, yeah.
Well, on that note, if you want to find me and the things that I work on, because these two don't want to be found anywhere, you can find me over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where Dr. Perlmutter and I can be found talking about a whole host of films in the past. On the Kulturecast, I haven't gotten him on anything else yet. That may change in the future, but for right now, the Kulturecast is the main place you can find Dr. Perlmutter and I talking about things, but there's plenty of other content on Weirding Way Media that doesn't involve me, like Midnight Viewing and The Projection Booth and 80s TV Ladies and The Feminine Critique, plenty of things that I'm not on. So go listen to those things. If you want to support the show in a financial way, patreon.com/Kulturecast is where you can go to kick a couple dollars my way. Every little bit helps, and you get access to the only thing that's not on Weirding Way Media's free website, which is Rankin' on Bond, which is coming to a close. The next show will be free, but you'll be able to get the next show on the Patreon for ad some people care about, and some people. So all of the plugs out of the way. Thank you both for joining me. I had a great time both watching the movie and talking with you both about it. And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.